I'm Jessica Chen, 29 years old, and I thought climbing the corporate ladder meant my family would finally see my worth. For 6 years, I'd worked 16-hour days at Morrison Associates, the premier marketing firm in downtown Seattle, building campaigns that generated millions in revenue. When the regional director position opened up, a role that would make me the youngest person ever to hold that title at the company, I knew this was my moment. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What I didn't expect was the phone call that would shatter everything I believed about family loyalty. Jessica, we need to talk. My mother's voice was unusually serious that Tuesday evening. It's about your brother Tyler and this promotion situation. We've made some calls. The betrayal that followed would teach me that sometimes the people who claim to love you most are the ones most willing to sabotage your dreams. But what my parents didn't know was that their interference would trigger a chain of events that would expose truths they never intended to reveal and give me something far more valuable than any promotion could offer. Growing up in the suburbs of Tacoma, Washington, I learned early that achievement meant everything in the Chen household. My father, David Chen, had built his accounting firm from scratch after immigrating from Taiwan in his 20s, and my mother, Linda, worked as a high school principal. Both of them believed success was measured in titles, salaries, and social recognition. Our dinner table conversations revolved around test scores, college applications, and career trajectories from the time I could hold a fork. Tyler, my older brother by 3 years, had always been the golden child. At 6'2", with an easy smile and natural charisma, he breezed through high school as student body president and star of the debate team. While I spent Friday nights studying in my room, Tyler was at parties, building the social network that our parents believed would serve him well in business. When he graduated from University of Washington with a business degree and landed his first job at a mid-sized advertising agency in Portland, my parents treated it like he'd conquered the corporate world. Meanwhile, my own achievements seemed to fade into background noise. Graduating summa cum laude from Seattle University with a double major in marketing and communications earned me a brief congratulations before conversation shifted to Tyler's latest client win or his new apartment with a view of the Columbia River. When I started at Morrison Associates as a junior account coordinator, making more money in my first year than Tyler made in his third, my parents nodded approvingly but spent most of that dinner discussing Tyler's promotion to account manager. The pattern had been established for so long that I'd almost stopped noticing it. Almost. Morrison & Associates was everything I'd dreamed of when I first walked into their glass-walled offices overlooking Elliott Bay. Founded by Margaret Morrison in 1987, the company had built its reputation on innovative campaigns for tech giants, sustainable brands, and emerging startups. The culture was intensely competitive but fair. Your results spoke louder than your connections, and creativity mattered more than politics. It was the kind of place where someone like me, who had more drive than charm, could actually thrive. My first assignment was supporting the team that handled Ecotech Industries, a renewable energy company looking to rebrand their image for millennial consumers. While senior associates debated broad strategy in conference rooms, I spent nights and weekends diving deep into consumer research, identifying microtrends and behavioral patterns that others had missed. My analysis revealed that their target demographic wasn't just interested in environmental benefits. They were motivated by a desire to feel innovative and forward-thinking. The campaign I proposed shifted Ecotech's messaging from "Save the Planet" to "Be the Change," featuring real customers who had transformed their energy usage and, by extension, their self-image. The campaign exceeded engagement targets by 340% and generated $2.8 million in new subscriptions within the first quarter. More importantly, it caught the attention of Margaret Morrison herself. "Jessica," she called me into her corner office after the campaign results came in, "this kind of insight is exactly what separates good marketers from great ones. You didn't just understand the product, you understood the psychology behind the purchase." That meeting changed everything. Margaret began including me in strategy sessions typically reserved for senior staff. She assigned me to shadow different department heads to understand the full scope of the business. When major clients visited, she made sure I was part of the presentation team. It wasn't nepotism or favoritism, it was recognition of results, and I thrived under that kind of meritocratic system. Over the next 5 years, I threw myself into every project with the intensity of someone who had something to prove. The Smart Home campaign, that positioned a security company as a lifestyle brand rather than a safety product. The restaurant chain rebrand that increased foot traffic by 180% in 6 months. The pharmaceutical campaign that made a depression medication feel approachable rather than clinical. Each success built on the last, creating a portfolio that spoke to my ability to see beyond surface-level marketing to the deeper emotional drivers that motivated consumer behavior. My personal life took a back seat to professional growth, but I told myself it was temporary. While college friends were getting married and buying houses, I was working until midnight, perfecting presentations and analyzing market data. Weekend social events got declined in favor of industry conferences and networking sessions. Dating became sporadic and ultimately impossible to maintain when every relationship felt secondary to the next big campaign. My parents viewed this single-minded focus with a mixture of pride and concern. During monthly family dinners at their Tudor-style home in Tacoma, my mother would ask pointed questions about my social life while simultaneously bragging to neighbors about my success. My father appreciated the financial achievements. My salary had more than doubled since starting at Morrison Associates, but worried aloud about my work-life balance. "Jessica works too hard," he would tell relatives at family gatherings. "Tyler has found a better balance. He's building relationships, not just a career." Tyler, meanwhile, had settled into a comfortable routine in Portland. His job at the advertising agency provided steady work and reasonable hours, allowing him to pursue hobbies like rock climbing and craft brewing. He'd been dating Sarah Matthews, a kindergarten teacher, for 2 years, and their relationship had the easy, uncomplicated quality that my parents found reassuring. Tyler's life looked like what they imagined success should feel like: balanced, social, and seemingly effortless. The contrast between our approaches to career building became more apparent during family visits. Tyler would arrive with stories about office happy hours, weekend camping trips with colleagues, and collaborative projects that felt more like social events than work. His achievements were presented as team efforts, shared victories that reflected well on his ability to work with others. My successes, by comparison, sounded solitary and intense. When I described landing a major client or developing a breakthrough campaign strategy, it often involved late nights, individual research, and personal sacrifice. My parents listened with pride, but I could see the concern in their eyes. They worried that my drive was isolating me from the kind of relationships and experiences they valued. This fundamental difference in how we approached success would become crucial 6 months later, when the opportunity that would change everything finally presented itself. Margaret Morrison had been talking about succession planning for years. At 68, she was ready to step back from day-to-day operations while maintaining her role as company founder and strategic advisor. The regional director position would essentially serve as her second in command, overseeing all West Coast operations and reporting directly to the board of directors. It was the kind of role that people spent entire careers working toward, and at 29, I would be the youngest person in the company's history to hold such a position. The possibility had been floating around the office for months before Margaret made it official. Senior staff speculated about external hires, internal promotions, and potential restructuring. The conventional wisdom was that someone with at least 15 years of experience would get the role, probably someone who had managed large teams and had established relationships with major clients. But I had something that experience alone couldn't provide: results that spoke for themselves, and Margaret's personal confidence in my strategic thinking. The conversation that would change my life happened on a rainy Thursday morning in early March. Margaret asked me to join her for coffee at the small cafe on the first floor of our building, away from the office buzz and potential interruptions. "Jessica," she began, stirring cream into her coffee with deliberate precision, "I've been watching your work for 5 years now, and I think you know where this conversation is heading." My heart started racing, but I kept my expression neutral, professional. "The regional director position," she continued, requires someone who understands both the creative and business sides of what we do. Someone who can think strategically about market trends while still connecting with the human psychology behind consumer behavior. You've demonstrated both of those qualities consistently. She paused, studying my face. I'm not going to pretend this wouldn't be a significant step up in responsibility. You'd be managing a team of 47 people across 3 offices. You'd be the primary point of contact for our largest clients. The board would expect you to present quarterly reports and participate in long-term strategic planning. I understand, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. There would be challenges, Margaret continued. Some people would question your age and experience. You'd need to prove yourself not just to me, but to clients who might initially be skeptical. The hours would be demanding, probably more than what you're used to, and the pressure would be intense. She leaned forward slightly. But I believe you're ready for it. Your work speaks for itself, and I've seen how you handle pressure. The question is, are you ready to take this on? The moment felt surreal, like something I'd imagined so many times that experiencing it in reality seemed almost anticlimactic. This was what I'd been working toward for 6 years, the validation that my approach, my sacrifices, my relentless focus had been worth it. Yes, I said without hesitation. I'm ready. Margaret smiled, the first time I'd seen her look genuinely pleased, rather than professionally satisfied. Good. I'll need you to prepare a presentation for the board meeting next month. Think of it as your vision for the role, how you'd approach the challenges, what strategies you'd implement, how you'd manage the transition. They'll want to see not just what you've accomplished, but how you think about the future. As we walked back upstairs, she added almost casually, I'd recommend keeping this confidential until after the board meeting. These things can get complicated if word spreads too early. I spent the rest of that day in a state of controlled excitement, drafting presentation outlines and strategic frameworks while maintaining my regular work schedule. The secret felt enormous, like carrying around a piece of my future that no one else could see yet. That evening, I drove to my small apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, replaying the conversation and imagining how different my life might look in just a few months. The regional director position came with a salary increase that would finally allow me to buy a place of my own, maybe even that craftsman house I'd been eyeing in the Wallingford area. More importantly, it represented the kind of professional recognition I'd been working toward since college. I wanted to call someone to share the news and excitement, but Margaret's advice about confidentiality made sense. Premature celebration could create complications if something went wrong with the board approval process. Instead, I spent the evening researching comparable positions at other firms, studying industry trends, and beginning to outline the presentation that would determine my professional future. The next few weeks would be crucial, and I intended to be as prepared as possible. What I didn't know was that within 72 hours, my family would turn this opportunity into the most painful conflict of my life and set in motion events that would reveal truths about loyalty, ambition, and the price of success that I never could have anticipated. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The phone call that would unravel everything came on a Tuesday evening, 3 days after my conversation with Margaret. I was in my apartment, surrounded by research materials for my board presentation, when my mother's name appeared on my phone screen. Her tone was different from the usual weekly check-in calls, more formal, almost businesslike. Jessica, your father and I need to speak with you about something important. Can you come by the house this weekend? Tyler will be driving up from Portland. Something in her voice made my stomach tighten. Is everything okay? Is someone sick? No one's sick, she replied curtly. But we have a family matter to discuss. It's about your career situation and some decisions that need to be made. My career situation. The phrase sent a chill through me. I hadn't mentioned the promotion opportunity to anyone. Margaret's advice about confidentiality had been clear. How could my parents possibly know about it? Mom, I'm not sure what you mean by... Saturday at 2 o'clock, she interrupted. We'll discuss everything then. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in confusion. In 36 hours, I'd gone from the highest point of my professional life to a mysterious family summit that felt ominous in ways I couldn't articulate. The rest of the week passed in a haze of distraction. I tried to focus on my presentation preparation, researching market expansion strategies and competitive analysis, but my mother's call kept replaying in my mind. How could they know about the promotion, and why did Tyler need to be there? I considered calling my brother directly, but Tyler and I had never had the kind of relationship where we confided in each other about serious matters. Our conversations were typically surface-level updates about work, his relationship with Sarah, and family gossip. The idea of reaching out to him about this felt awkward and potentially revealing. By Friday evening, my anxiety had reached the point where I was seriously considering canceling the family meeting altogether. But the Chen family didn't operate that way. When my parents called a family meeting, attendance wasn't optional. Saturday morning, I drove the familiar route from Seattle to Tacoma, past the familiar landmarks of my childhood. The strip mall where I'd taken piano lessons, the high school where I'd spent countless hours in the library, the park where Tyler had played Little League while I sat in the bleachers with a book. The 30-minute drive felt both too long and not nearly long enough to prepare for whatever awaited me. My parents' house looked exactly the same as always. The meticulously maintained lawn, the seasonal flower arrangements my mother changed 4 times a year, the American flag hanging from the front porch. Tyler's silver Honda Civic was already parked in the driveway, meaning this conversation had probably already started without me. I found them gathered in the formal living room, the space my mother reserved for important occasions and difficult conversations. Tyler sat on the burgundy leather sofa, wearing a casual button-down shirt and looking uncomfortable. My father occupied his usual armchair, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed what appeared to be printed documents. My mother sat across from Tyler, her posture rigid with the kind of controlled energy that typically preceded life-changing announcements. "Jessica," my father looked up as I entered. "Thank you for coming. Please sit down." The formality felt surreal, like being called into a principal's office or a job interview, rather than a family discussion. I chose the chair closest to the door, some instinct telling me I might want an easy exit. "We know about the promotion opportunity at your company," my mother began without preamble. "The regional director position." My mouth went dry. "How could you possibly?" "Margaret Morrison is a friend of the family," my father interrupted, consulting his notes. "She and your mother served together on the board of the Pacific Northwest Arts Foundation. When Margaret mentioned she was considering you for this position, she wanted to get our perspective on whether you were ready for that level of responsibility." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Margaret had called my parents? To discuss my promotion? This violated every professional boundary I could think of, not to mention the confidentiality she'd specifically requested. "She called you?" I managed to ask, my voice coming out smaller than intended. "She's known you since you were a child, Jessica," my mother replied, as if this explained everything. "She wanted to make sure the family was supportive of such a significant career move. She's concerned about the pressure and whether you have the right support system in place." Tyler shifted uncomfortably on the sofa, avoiding eye contact. Something about his body language suggested he already knew where this conversation was heading. "After discussing it as a family," my father continued, "we've decided that this isn't the right opportunity for you at this time." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You've decided?" "The position would require relocating to Los Angeles to oversee the West Coast expansion," my mother explained, her tone becoming more animated. "That would mean leaving Seattle, leaving your support system, taking on responsibilities that might be overwhelming for someone your age?" "Los Angeles," I repeated, confused. Margaret hadn't mentioned anything about relocating. My father nodded gravely. Margaret explained that the regional director would need to establish a physical presence in their largest market. "You'd be managing the LA office directly, which means living there at least initially." Something wasn't adding up. Margaret's conversation with me had focused on overseeing West Coast operations from Seattle, with travel to other offices as needed. The idea of relocating to Los Angeles had never been mentioned. "But that's not what she told me," I said slowly. "She said the position was based in Seattle." My parents exchanged a glance that made my stomach drop. My mother's expression softened into what I recognized as her preparing to deliver bad news face. Jessica, honey, she began, Margaret is trying to be kind, but she's also concerned about your reaction to the full scope of the role. The LA relocation is non-negotiable. The board insisted on it. Tyler finally spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. Jess, there's something else. I turned to look at my brother, noting the guilt written across his features. What? The company reached out to me too, he said, still not meeting my eyes. About a different position, marketing director for their Portland expansion. The pieces began falling into place with horrifying clarity. They offered you a job? It would be perfect for Tyler. My mother jumped in enthusiastically. He could stay in Portland, be closer to family, and it's exactly the kind of opportunity he's been looking for. Margaret thinks you two would make an excellent team. You in Los Angeles, Tyler in Portland, coordinating the West Coast expansion together. I stared at my brother, whose face had turned an uncomfortable shade of red. You knew about my promotion opportunity, and you didn't tell me they were considering you for something too? I wanted to tell you, Tyler said defensively, but Margaret asked me to keep it confidential until she could discuss it with the family. Discuss it with the family? I repeated, my voice rising. This is my career, not a family decision. My father's expression hardened. It becomes a family decision when it affects family relationships. If you take this Los Angeles position, you'd be isolated from everyone who cares about you. Tyler's opportunity allows him to advance his career while maintaining important connections. And what about my connections? What about what I want? What you want, my mother said carefully, might not be what's best for you in the long run. This Los Angeles position sounds prestigious, but it would mean starting over socially, working impossible hours with no family support, and potentially sacrificing any chance of finding a life partner and having children. The conversation was spiraling into territory I hadn't expected. Mom, I'm 29 years old. I can make my own decisions about my career and my personal life. Of course you can, my father agreed. But that doesn't mean we can't offer guidance when we see you heading toward a mistake. Tyler stood up abruptly, pacing toward the window. This is exactly what I was afraid would happen, he muttered. What you were afraid would happen? I asked, turning to face him fully. He spun around, frustration evident in his voice. I knew you'd react like this. I told Margaret that offering us both positions at the same time would create problems, but she insisted it was the best solution for everyone. Problems for whom? I demanded. For you, Tyler exploded. You've been working yourself to death for 6 years, Jessica. You don't have friends. You don't date. You live alone in that tiny apartment and work until midnight every night. Taking an even bigger job in a city where you don't know anyone would be career suicide disguised as a promotion. The accusations stung because it contained enough truth to make me question myself. But it also revealed something I hadn't fully understood before. My family's perspective on my choices had been fundamentally different from my own all along. So instead of letting me make that decision myself, I said slowly, you all decided that Tyler should get a promotion while I should, what, stay where I am? Not stay where you are, my mother corrected. Margaret mentioned that there's a senior account director position opening up in Seattle. It would be perfect for you, more responsibility without the pressure of relocating or managing such a large team. A consolation prize, I said flatly. A realistic next step, my father countered. One that doesn't require sacrificing your entire personal life for professional advancement. The room fell silent as the full scope of their intervention became clear. They had coordinated with Margaret Morrison, my mentor and boss, to redirect my career path in a direction they deemed more appropriate. Tyler's opportunity had been positioned as the reasonable choice while mine had been reframed as reckless and isolating. What exactly did you tell Margaret? I asked, my voice deadly calm. My parents exchanged another glance. My mother answered carefully. We expressed our concerns about the demands of the regional director position and whether it aligned with your long-term happiness. We also mentioned that Tyler might be interested in opportunities with the company. You sabotaged me, I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. We protected you, my mother replied firmly. from making a decision you'd regret for the rest of your life. Tyler sat back down heavily, running his hands through his hair. Look, Jess, I know how this looks, but it wasn't planned this way. Margaret called me after talking to Mom and Dad. She asked if I'd be interested in discussing opportunities with Morrison and Associates. I never asked for this, but you didn't refuse it either, I pointed out. Because it's a good opportunity, he said defensively, and because maybe they're right about the LA thing being wrong for you. You've already given up so much for your career. How much more are you willing to sacrifice? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications about choices I'd made and sacrifices I'd accepted as necessary. But what bothered me most wasn't their concern for my well-being. It was the presumption that they knew better than I did what would make me happy. What I'm willing to sacrifice, I said finally, should be my decision to make. My father leaned forward in his chair. Jessica, we love you, and we want what's best for you. Sometimes that means making difficult decisions together as a family. Together? I stood up abruptly. Nothing about this feels like we made any decisions together. It feels like you made decisions about me, and then informed me after the fact. Because we knew you'd react emotionally instead of thinking logically, my mother said, her patience clearly wearing thin. You've been so focused on proving yourself professionally that you've lost perspective on what actually matters in life. The accusation hit deeper than I expected, touching on insecurities I'd buried under years of professional achievement. But it also clarified something important. My family's definition of success was fundamentally incompatible with my own. What matters to me, I said carefully, is being recognized for my work and having the opportunity to build something meaningful. If that requires sacrifices, they're mine to make. Even if those sacrifices mean being alone? Tyler asked quietly. The question revealed the heart of their concern and the fundamental misunderstanding that had led to this intervention. They saw my career focus as a path toward isolation. I saw it as a path toward independence and professional fulfillment. I'd rather be alone and professionally fulfilled than surrounded by people who don't respect my choices, I replied, looking directly at each of them. The room fell silent again, the weight of that statement settling over all of us. I could see hurt in my mother's eyes, disappointment in my father's expression, and confusion in Tyler's face. Finally, my father spoke. Margaret is expecting our decision by Monday. She wanted to know whether the family was supportive of moving forward with Tyler's opportunity. Our decision? I repeated. The family's decision, my mother clarified, about which direction makes the most sense for everyone involved. I looked around the room at the three people who had shaped my understanding of family loyalty and support, realizing that their version of both was conditional on my compliance with their vision of my life. I need to think about this, I said, moving toward the door. Jessica, my father called after me, we hope you'll consider what we've discussed. This isn't about limiting your opportunities. It's about making sure you don't make a decision you'll regret. I paused at the doorway, looking back at them. What if the decision I regret is listening to you instead of trusting myself? As I drove back to Seattle, my mind raced through the implications of everything I'd learned. Margaret had spoken to my parents about a promotion opportunity she'd explicitly asked me to keep confidential. My family had coordinated to redirect my career path without consulting me. Tyler had been offered a position at my company and had kept it secret. But most disturbing was the realization that the promotion I'd thought was mine might never have been real in the first place. If Margaret had been discussing alternative arrangements with my family and my brother, what did that say about her confidence in my abilities? The next 24 hours would force me to confront questions about trust, autonomy, and family loyalty that I'd never had to answer before. And the decisions I made would determine not just my professional future, but my relationship with the people I'd always believed had my best interests at heart. Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I sat in my apartment with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The events of the previous day replayed in my mind like a nightmare I couldn't shake. Every detail felt surreal. My parents coordinating with Margaret, Tyler's secret job opportunity, the supposed LA relocation requirement that had never been mentioned to me directly. Something wasn't adding up, and the more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that I wasn't getting the full story. My phone had been buzzing intermittently since I'd left Tacoma, mostly texts from my mother asking if I was thinking rationally about our conversation, and one from Tyler that simply read, "I'm sorry this got so complicated. Call me if you want to talk." I'd ignored them all, needing space to process what felt like a fundamental betrayal of trust. But by noon, my confusion had crystallized into determination. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them from my family. I started by pulling up Margaret Morrison's contact information, then hesitated. Calling my boss on a Sunday to question what my parents had told me felt like career suicide, but the alternative, accepting their version of events without verification, felt worse. Instead, I decided to start with research. If the regional director position truly required relocating to Los Angeles, there would be documentation somewhere. Job postings, company announcements, board meeting minutes. Something that would confirm or contradict what my family had claimed. Morrison Associates maintained a comprehensive intranet system that employees could access remotely. I logged in and began searching for any mention of LA expansion, regional director responsibilities, or relocation requirements. What I found was illuminating in its absence. The most recent strategic planning documents, updated just 6 weeks ago, made no mention of establishing a physical presence in Los Angeles. The West Coast expansion strategy focused on coordinating existing offices in Seattle, Portland, and San Francisco, with remote management of client relationships in Southern California. There was absolutely nothing about requiring the regional director to relocate. My hands shook slightly as I continued searching. Board meeting minutes from the past year consistently discussed the regional director role as being based in Seattle, with travel requirements to other markets but no permanent relocation. The position description that HR had circulated internally 3 months ago, before Margaret had approached me, explicitly stated Seattle-based with regional travel expectations. Either the company had completely changed their strategy in the past week without updating any documentation, or my parents had been given false information. Or worse, they had fabricated the LA requirement entirely. I picked up my phone and dialed Sarah Martinez, Tyler's girlfriend, before I could second-guess myself. Sarah and I had always gotten along well, and she had a refreshingly direct communication style that might help me understand Tyler's perspective on all this. "Jessica!" Sarah sounded surprised but pleased to hear from me. "Tyler said you had a family meeting yesterday. How did it go?" "That's actually why I'm calling," I said carefully. "I wanted to get your take on something. Has Tyler mentioned anything about job opportunities in Seattle recently?" There was a pause. "You mean the Morrison and Associates thing? He's been stressed about it all week. He wasn't sure whether he should even consider it, since it might create problems with you." "Problems with me?" "Well, competing with his little sister for jobs at the same company. He was worried it would look like he was trying to ride your coattails or something." Sarah's casual mention of competing hit me like a slap. "Sarah, did Tyler tell you that we were competing for the same position?" Another pause, longer this time. "Aren't you?" He said Margaret Morrison had reached out about opportunities for both of you, but that they were looking at different roles that might complement each other. "Different roles?" "Yeah, something about you handling the executive strategy side and him managing the operational implementation. He made it sound like a partnership opportunity." My mind reeled. This was completely different from what my parents had described, and different from what Tyler had said during our family meeting. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and please be honest with me. Has Tyler been planning to leave his current job? Planning? God, Jessica, he's been miserable there for months. His boss is a micromanager, the company culture is toxic, and they passed him over for a promotion twice in the past year. When this Morrison opportunity came up, it felt like a lifeline." This was news to me. Tyler had never mentioned being unhappy at work during family dinners. If anything, my parents spoke about his job as if it were going well. "How long has he been unhappy there?" "Since last summer, at least." He applied for several other positions but didn't get past the first round of interviews. I think his confidence was pretty shaken. That's why this Morrison thing felt so important to him. After ending the call with Sarah, I sat in my living room staring out at the gray Seattle sky, trying to piece together a narrative that made sense. Tyler was desperately unhappy at his current job and needed a career change. Margaret had somehow learned about this and reached out to him about opportunities. My parents had become involved in coordinating what they saw as a perfect solution for both their children. But the more I thought about it, the more questions arose. How had Margaret learned about Tyler's situation? Why hadn't she mentioned his potential involvement when she initially discussed the regional director position with me? And why did my family's version of events include details about LA relocation that contradicted every company document I could find? I needed to talk to someone at Morrison Associates, but approaching Margaret directly still felt too risky. Instead, I decided to reach out to David Kim, a senior associate in our strategy department, who had become something of a mentor over the years. David was politically savvy and well-connected within the company. If anyone would know about behind-the-scenes discussions regarding the regional director position, it would be him. I crafted a careful text message. David, would you have time for coffee this week? I'd like to get your perspective on some career planning questions. His response came within an hour. How about tomorrow morning before work? There's something I've been wanting to discuss with you anyway. The ominous tone of his message made my stomach clench, but I agreed to meet him at our usual cafe on Pine Street at 7:30 a.m. The rest of Sunday crawled by as I alternated between researching company policies and trying to distract myself with Netflix. My parents called twice, which I let go to voicemail. Their messages became increasingly concerned, with my mother's second voicemail taking on a slightly guilt-laden tone. Jessica, honey, I hope you're not overthinking our conversation yesterday. We love you and want to make sure you're making decisions that will lead to long-term happiness. Please call us back. Tyler sent a longer text message around dinner time. Jess, I know yesterday was a lot to process. I want you to know that I never intended for any of this to happen the way it did. If you want to talk through the details, I'm here. I don't want this to damage our relationship. The word details stood out to me. What details? And why was everyone being so vague about specifics? That evening, I did something I rarely allowed myself to do. I called my college roommate and closest friend, Amanda Walsh, who now worked as a corporate lawyer in San Francisco. Amanda knew me well enough to cut through emotional confusion and focus on practical realities. Let me get this straight, Amanda said after I'd recounted the weekend's events. Your boss spoke to your parents about a promotion opportunity without your knowledge or consent? Apparently they know each other through some nonprofit board. Jessica, that's completely inappropriate regardless of their personal relationship. Discussing an employee's career prospects with their family members violates so many professional boundaries I don't even know where to start. Amanda's indignation was reassuring. At least one person understood why this situation felt wrong. And your family is claiming this position requires relocation based on what? Their conversation with your boss? That's what they said, but I can't find any internal documentation that supports it. Have you considered the possibility that your boss never actually intended to offer you this position? That maybe she was floating the idea to gauge interest and your family's response influenced her decision? The suggestion hit me like a punch to the gut, but it aligned with a fear I'd been trying to suppress since yesterday. You think the whole thing was just exploratory? I think you need more information before you make any decisions, Amanda replied carefully. Corporate politics can be incredibly complex, especially when personal relationships get involved. You need to find out what's actually on the table versus what your family thinks is on the table. After hanging up with Amanda, I spent the evening preparing for my conversation with David Kim. I made a list of specific questions about the regional director position, company expansion plans, and any discussions involving external candidates or family members of current employees. But mostly, I tried to prepare myself for the possibility that the opportunity I'd thought was within my grasp had never been real to begin with. Monday morning arrived with typical Seattle drizzle, and I found David already seated at our usual corner table when I arrived at the cafe. His expression was serious in a way that immediately put me on edge. "Thanks for meeting me," I said, settling into the chair across from him with my coffee. "Actually, I'm glad you reached out," David replied, stirring his espresso thoughtfully. "There's been some chatter around the office that I thought you should know about." My heart rate accelerated. "What kind of chatter?" "About the regional director position. Word is getting around that Margaret is considering external candidates, possibly someone with family connections to current employees." The careful phrasing felt loaded with meaning. Family connections? David leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. Jessica, I'm going to be direct with you because I think you deserve to know what's being discussed. There are rumors that Margaret is considering Tyler Chen, your brother, for a newly created marketing director position that would essentially serve as a stepping stone to regional leadership. The words hit me like ice water. A stepping stone? The theory is that she wants to bring in someone she can mentor into the regional director role over time, rather than promoting someone internally who might not have the right temperament for executive leadership. I set down my coffee cup carefully, afraid my shaking hands might betray my emotional state. David, what exactly are you saying? I'm saying that there's speculation you were never actually being considered for the regional director position, that Margaret used discussions with you to evaluate your readiness, but always intended to look elsewhere for the actual role. The cafe suddenly felt too warm, too crowded, too loud. I could hear the espresso machine hissing, conversations from other tables blending into white noise, the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. How long have these rumors been circulating? About a week, David admitted. Since word got out that Margaret had been in contact with someone from your family about opportunities at the company. A week. Which meant people had been discussing my professional future, and apparent lack thereof, while I'd been working nights and weekends preparing for a board presentation that might never happen. David, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. In your opinion, based on what you know about company politics and Margaret's decision-making, do you think I was ever seriously being considered for this position? David was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful and sad. Finally, he spoke carefully. Hi, Duck. I think Margaret genuinely respects your work and sees potential in you, but I also think she's been under pressure from the board to bring in someone with a different profile for executive leadership, someone with broader industry connections, maybe different interpersonal skills. Someone like Tyler. Someone who fits a particular image of what leadership looks like, David replied diplomatically. I sat back in my chair, the full scope of the situation finally becoming clear. This wasn't about family interference in my career decisions. This was about my family being recruited to provide cover for a decision that had already been made, a decision that positioned Tyler as the preferred candidate, while making it look like a family choice rather than a professional rejection. So what should I do? I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. David's expression softened. You should get all the facts before you make any decisions. Talk to Margaret directly. Find out what's actually being offered and to whom. Don't let other people, even family, make career decisions for you based on incomplete information. As I walked back to my apartment, David's advice echoed in my mind. I needed to confront Margaret directly, regardless of how uncomfortable that conversation might be. But first, I needed to understand exactly what game was being played, and who the real players were. Because one thing had become crystal clear. The opportunity I'd thought was mine had been slipping away, while I'd been focused on preparing for a future that might never have existed. I spent Monday afternoon in a state of controlled fury, drafting and redrafting an email to Margaret Morrison requesting an immediate meeting. Each version sounded either too emotional or too passive, too confrontational or too weak. Finally, I settled on professional directness. Margaret, I need to discuss the regional director position with you as soon as possible. There seems to be some confusion about the details that requires clarification. When would be a good time today or tomorrow? Her response came within 30 minutes. Jessica, of course. Can you come to my office at 4:30 today? I've been meaning to follow up with you anyway. The phrase, follow up with you anyway, sent a chill through me. It suggested she had information to share that I wasn't going to like. I used the remaining 2 hours to prepare for what might be the most important conversation of my career. I printed out copies of the internal documents I'd found regarding the regional director position, organized my questions, and practiced maintaining my composure regardless of what revelations awaited me. At 4:25, I stood outside Margaret's corner office, taking deep breaths and steeling myself for whatever truth lay ahead. Through the glass walls, I could see her reviewing documents, her silver hair caught in the late afternoon light streaming through the windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Jessica, she looked up as I knocked. Please, come in and close the door. I settled into the chair across from her desk, The same seat where she'd first discussed the promotion opportunity just 5 days earlier. The room felt different now, less welcoming, more formal. "I imagine you have questions," Margaret began, removing her reading glasses and setting them aside. "Your mother mentioned that the family discussion on Saturday was quite intense." The casual reference to my mother made my jaw clench. "Margaret, I need to understand what's actually happening here. The information my parents gave me about this position doesn't match anything I can find in company documents." Margaret's expression remained neutral, but I caught a flicker of something. Surprise? Guilt? In her eyes. "What specifically concerns you?" I pulled out the printed documents I'd prepared. "According to my parents, this position requires relocating to Los Angeles. But every internal document I can find indicates it's Seattle-based with regional travel. The strategic planning documents, the HR posting, the board meeting minutes, none of them mention LA relocation." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, studying the papers I'd placed on her desk. Finally, she spoke carefully. "Jessica, I think there may have been some miscommunication during my conversation with your parents." "Miscommunication?" "I mentioned that the regional role would involve significant travel to Los Angeles and potentially establishing stronger relationships with our Southern California clients. Your parents may have interpreted that as a relocation requirement." The explanation felt rehearsed, like she'd been preparing for this conversation. "Margaret, my parents are both highly educated professionals. A miscommunication of that magnitude seems unlikely." Her composure cracked slightly. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that either they deliberately misrepresented what you told them, or you told them something different from what you told me. Either way, I need to know what's actually true." Margaret stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the bay. When she turned back to face me, her expression had shifted from professional courtesy to something more guarded. "Jessica, I'm going to be frank with you. The conversation I had with your parents was more complex than a simple update about your career prospects." My heart started pounding. "What do you mean?" "I reached out to them because I've been concerned about your readiness for executive leadership. Not your technical skills or your strategic thinking, those are exemplary, but leadership at this level requires different qualities than what you're used to." The words stung, but I kept my voice steady. "What qualities am I lacking?" "Emotional intelligence, team building, the ability to navigate complex interpersonal dynamics." Margaret returned to her seat, leaning forward slightly. "Jessica, you're brilliant at analyzing markets and developing strategies, but you work in isolation. You don't build relationships with colleagues. You don't mentor junior staff. You don't participate in the social aspects of office culture that help build trust and loyalty." Each criticism felt like a carefully aimed dart. "Is that what you discussed with my parents, my supposed lack of interpersonal skills?" "I discussed my concerns about whether you were ready for the challenges of executive leadership, yes, and I asked for their perspective on how you handle pressure and interpersonal conflict." "And what did they tell you?" Margaret hesitated. "They confirmed some of my concerns. They mentioned that you've become increasingly isolated over the years, that you struggle with work-life balance, that you have difficulty accepting feedback that challenges your perspective." The betrayal felt complete. My parents hadn't just interfered with my career, they'd actively undermined my professional reputation with my own boss. "So you decided I wasn't suitable for the position?" "I decided that you might not be ready for this particular position at this particular time," Margaret corrected. "But that doesn't mean there aren't other opportunities that might be better suited to your strengths. Like the senior account director position my parents mentioned?" "That's one possibility. Or we could discuss a specialized strategic planning role that would utilize your analytical skills without requiring the same level of people management." I felt like I was being offered consolation prizes for a competition I hadn't known I was losing. "And Tyler? What role does he play in all this?" Margaret's expression became more guarded. "Your brother has a different skill set that might complement what we're looking for in regional leadership. You offered him a job. I discussed potential opportunities with him, yes." "What kind of opportunities?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she answered, "A marketing director position that would involve managing our Portland expansion and potentially serving as a liaison between our Oregon and Washington operations. A stepping stone to regional director. A pathway to regional leadership, potentially, if he demonstrates the right capabilities. The room felt like it was spinning. Everything I'd worked for over 6 years was being handed to my brother, who had no experience in our industry and no track record of the kind of results I'd consistently delivered. Margaret, I need to understand something. When you initially approached me about the regional director position, were you seriously considering me for the role, or were you using those conversations to evaluate whether I was suitable? The question hung in the air between us. Margaret's hesitation told me everything I needed to know. I was exploring all options, she said finally. That's not an answer. Jessica, the board has concerns about promoting someone so young into such a senior role without broader industry experience. Your work here has been excellent, but executive leadership requires a different kind of credibility. Credibility that Tyler has? Tyler has experience managing teams, building client relationships, and navigating complex organizational dynamics in ways that you haven't demonstrated here. I laughed bitterly. Tyler has been struggling in his current job for months. His girlfriend told me he's been passed over for promotion twice and has been desperately looking for new opportunities. Margaret's expression sharpened. Where did you hear that? I talked to Sarah directly. Tyler's been miserable at his current company and needed a career change. This isn't about his superior qualifications. It's about you providing him with a lifeline while using his availability to justify not promoting me. That's not. It's exactly what happened, I interrupted, my composure finally cracking. You never intended to offer me this position. You used discussions with me to evaluate my readiness, then reached out to my family to find a more palatable alternative. Tyler gets a job he desperately needs, my parents get to feel like they've protected me from a mistake, and you get to avoid the risk of promoting someone you never fully trusted in the first place. Margaret's face flushed slightly. Jessica, that's an oversimplification of a complex situation. Is it? Because it seems like the only person who wasn't aware of how complex this situation was is me. I stood up, gathering my documents. I have one more question. If Tyler accepts this marketing director position, what happens to the regional director role? The board would likely postpone filling it until we have a stronger internal candidate pool. Meaning Tyler would be positioned as the eventual successor once he proves himself. Margaret didn't deny it. I see, I said quietly. So my choices are to accept a lateral move into a specialized role that removes me from the leadership track, or continue in my current position while my brother is groomed for the role I thought I was being considered for. Jessica, there will be other opportunities. When? In 5 years? 10 years? After Tyler has been established as the regional director, and I've been safely tucked away in a strategic planning role? Margaret's silence was answer enough. I walked toward the door, then paused. Margaret, I have to ask, was any of this real? The conversations about my potential? The board presentation? The strategic vision discussions? Or was it all just elaborate theater while you figured out how to bring Tyler into the company? Your contributions to this company have always been valued, Jessica. That hasn't changed. But my future here has changed, hasn't it? Margaret met my eyes directly for the first time since the conversation had begun. I think you need to decide what kind of career you want to build and whether Morrison Associates is the right place to build it. The words felt like a polite termination notice. I was being encouraged to leave, to remove myself from a situation that had become inconvenient for everyone involved. I need some time to think about everything you've told me, I said, my hand on the door handle. Of course. Take all the time you need. As I walked back to my desk, I felt the eyes of my colleagues following me. Word had clearly spread about the closed-door meeting with Margaret, and in the political ecosystem of Morrison and Associates, such meetings were rarely good news. I sat at my desk, staring at my computer screen without really seeing it, trying to process the full scope of what had just happened. The promotion I'd thought was within reach had never been real. My family had actively worked against my professional interests, while believing they were protecting me. My mentor had used my ambition to evaluate my worthiness, then found me lacking. But perhaps most devastating was the realization that I'd been completely wrong about my value within the company. I'd thought my results spoke for themselves. I'd believed that merit would be rewarded with opportunity. I'd assumed that 6 years of dedication and success had earned me consideration for advancement. Instead, I'd learned that politics, relationships, and perception mattered more than performance. That family connections could trump professional achievement. That being right about strategy meant nothing if people didn't trust your ability to lead. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "How did your meeting with Margaret go? Hope you were able to get some clarity." The casual tone, as if he were genuinely concerned about my well-being, made me want to throw my phone across the room. But instead, I found myself typing back, "Very enlightening, we should talk soon." Because suddenly, I realized there was one more conversation I needed to have before I decided what to do next. And this time, I wouldn't be the one caught off guard by hidden agendas and undisclosed information. Oholen. Tyler thought he understood what was happening here. My parents thought they'd successfully managed a delicate family situation. Margaret thought she'd navigated a complex personnel decision with minimal disruption. But none of them knew what I was about to discover when I started digging deeper into the real story behind Tyler's miraculous job opportunity and my family's convenient intervention. The game wasn't over. It was just entering a new phase, and this time, I intended to be the one setting the rules. That evening, I sat in my apartment with a bottle of wine I'd been saving for celebrating my promotion. Ironically, appropriate now for drowning my sorrows instead. But as the initial shock of Margaret's revelations wore off, anger began to replace despair. I'd been outmaneuvered, but the game wasn't over. If my family and Margaret thought they could orchestrate my professional future without my input, they were about to discover they'd seriously underestimated me. I opened my laptop and began researching Tyler's background more thoroughly than I ever had before. As his sister, I'd always taken his professional credentials at face value, but now I needed to understand exactly what qualifications he was bringing to Morrison Associates that supposedly made him more suitable for leadership than me. What I found was illuminating. Tyler's LinkedIn profile painted a picture of steady advancement, but a closer examination revealed concerning gaps. His current position at Hartwell Marketing had lasted only 18 months, shorter than I'd realized. His previous job at Northwest Creative had ended after just 10 months, with a 6-week gap before he found the Hartwell position. The job before that had lasted only 14 months. This wasn't the stable career progression my parents had always described during family dinners. This was the resume of someone who couldn't maintain positions long-term. I cross-referenced his employment dates with major projects he'd claimed credit for during family gatherings. The multi-million-dollar campaign he'd mentioned last Thanksgiving had been launched 3 months after he left Northwest Creative. The major client retention initiative he described at Christmas had begun 2 weeks before his departure from his previous company. Tyler had been taking credit for work that happened after he was no longer employed by the companies that executed it. But the most interesting discovery came when I searched for news articles and press releases about Tyler's supposed achievements. The breakthrough digital marketing campaign that had supposedly earned him recognition in the Portland business community? I found the actual case study buried in an industry publication. The lead strategist was a woman named Rachel Torres, with Tyler listed as a quote in the fine print. My brother hadn't just been exaggerating his role in successful projects, he'd been fundamentally misrepresenting his level of responsibility and impact. Armed with this information, I decided to make some phone calls. I started with Rachel Torres, whose contact information I found through her company's website. She was surprisingly willing to talk when I introduced myself as someone considering Tyler for a position and needing reference information. Tyler Chen? Rachel's voice carried a note of surprise. I haven't heard that name in a while. He worked on my team at Northwest Creative for about 6 months. Can you tell me about his contributions to the Cascade Brewing campaign? I understand he played a significant role in its success. There was a long pause. I'm not sure what you've been told, but Tyler was removed from that project before the strategy phase was completed. He had some philosophical differences with our approach. Philosophical differences? He wanted to pursue a much more traditional advertising strategy, despite our client specifically requesting innovative digital engagement. When I overruled his recommendations, he became quite difficult to work with. Difficult how? Rachel hesitated, then seemed to decide on honesty. He went over my head to complain about the campaign direction. When that didn't work, he started undermining team meetings by questioning decisions that had already been finalized. Eventually, my supervisor had to have a conversation with him about professional conduct. How did that go? Not well. Tyler left the company about 2 weeks later, claiming he'd found a better opportunity. But the Cascade campaign didn't launch until 3 months after his departure, and it was entirely based on the strategy he'd opposed. I thanked Rachel for her time and moved on to my next call, the HR department at Hartwell Marketing, Tyler's current employer. I couldn't get detailed information, but a friendly HR representative confirmed that Tyler had given notice the previous Friday and would be finishing his 2 weeks' notice this coming Friday. Tyler had already quit his job, meaning he'd committed to the Morrison Associates opportunity before our family meeting on Saturday. While my parents were lecturing me about making hasty career decisions, Tyler had already made his. The timeline was becoming clearer, and it painted a picture of coordination that went far beyond the casual family consultation my parents had described. I called Amanda again, needing a lawyer's perspective on what I was uncovering. "Jessica, this is starting to sound like a conspiracy," Amanda said after I'd recounted my research findings. "Your brother misrepresents his qualifications, your parents coordinate with your boss to undermine your candidacy, and meanwhile Tyler has already committed to taking a position that you were originally being considered for." "It gets worse," I said, pulling up another document I'd found. I looked up the Pacific Northwest Arts Foundation board that my mother supposedly serves on with Margaret. My mother isn't listed anywhere as a board member, past or present. What? I think they made up the connection to justify why Margaret would have called them about my career prospects. But if they don't actually know each other through the foundation, how did Margaret know to contact my parents at all? Amanda was quiet for a moment. "Jessica, have you considered the possibility that Tyler initiated this entire situation? That he found out about the regional director opportunity somehow and approached Margaret directly?" The suggestion hit me like a revelation. What if my parents hadn't been protecting me from a career mistake? What if they'd been recruited to help Tyler secure an opportunity he couldn't qualify for on his own merits? How would Tyler have known about the position? "You said Margaret asked you to keep the promotion opportunity confidential, but did you tell anyone, even casually?" I thought back to the past few weeks, trying to remember any conversations where I might have mentioned the possibility of advancement. Then it hit me. "The company holiday party," I said slowly. "In December, Tyler was in town for Christmas and came with me as my +1. He spent a lot of time networking, talking to people about the company culture, and asking questions about growth opportunities. Did he meet Margaret that night?" I closed my eyes, trying to reconstruct the evening. "Yes. She made a point of introducing herself to him, asking about his work in Portland. I remember thinking it was nice that she was being welcoming to my family." "Jessica, what if that wasn't social courtesy? What if Margaret was already evaluating Tyler as a potential candidate?" The pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. Tyler had used my company holiday party to position himself for opportunities within Morrison and Associates. He'd leveraged his connection to me to gain access to decision-makers, then somehow convinced Margaret that he was a better candidate for advancement than I was. But I still needed to understand how my parents had become involved in this scheme. Kavigi, Cray, I decided to drive to Tacoma unannounced. My parents' predictable Tuesday evening routine meant they'd be home, probably watching the news and preparing for an early bedtime. A surprise visit would prevent them from coordinating their story or preparing careful answers to difficult questions. The drive gave me time to organize my thoughts and plan my approach. I wouldn't reveal everything I'd discovered immediately. Instead, I'd start with simple questions and see how much truth I could extract before they realized I was conducting an investigation. I found them exactly where I'd expected. My father in his recliner reading the Wall Street Journal, my mother on the sofa with her tablet, probably playing her nightly word games. They looked up in surprise when I knocked on the front door. "Jessica!" My mother's expression shifted quickly from surprise to concern. "Is everything okay? You look upset." "I need to ask you both some questions about Saturday's conversation," I said, settling into the chair across from them. There are some things that aren't adding up. My parents exchanged a glance, the same coordination I'd noticed during our family meeting. What kind of things? My father asked carefully. Let's start with something simple. How exactly do you know Margaret Morrison? I told you, my mother replied. We serve together on the board of the Pacific Northwest Arts Foundation. Mom, I checked the foundation's website. You're not listed as a board member, current or former. The color drained slightly from my mother's face. Well, it's not the main board. It's a subcommittee for educational outreach. They don't list all the volunteers online. What's the name of this subcommittee? The Educational Partnership Initiative, my mother said, the pause betraying her improvisation. I pulled out my phone and began typing. Let me look that up. Jessica, what are you doing? My father interrupted, his voice taking on an edge. Why are you interrogating your mother like she's a criminal? Because I'm trying to understand how Margaret Morrison ended up discussing my career prospects with people she doesn't actually know. The room fell silent. My mother's tablet slipped slightly in her hands, and my father set down his newspaper entirely. How did Margaret really get in touch with you? I asked directly. Another long pause. Finally, my father spoke. Tyler asked us to reach out to her. Tyler asked you to contact my boss? He thought it would be helpful if she understood the family's perspective on your career goals, my mother added quickly. And what perspective was that? That you've been working too hard, sacrificing too much, and might benefit from guidance about work-life balance, before taking on even more responsibility. I stared at them, finally understanding the full scope of what had happened. Tyler convinced you to sabotage my promotion opportunity by telling my boss that I'm not ready for leadership. We didn't sabotage anything, my father protested. We provided honest feedback about our concerns. Concerns that Tyler encouraged you to share. Tyler was worried about you, my mother insisted. He said Margaret was considering offering you a position that would require moving to Los Angeles, working even longer hours, and isolating you further from family support. Mom, there was never any Los Angeles requirement. Tyler made that up. That's not possible. Margaret confirmed it when we spoke to her. No, she didn't. I confronted Margaret directly yesterday, and she admitted that was a miscommunication. But it wasn't a miscommunication, was it? Tyler told you to mention LA concerns, and Margaret played along to support the narrative that the position wasn't right for me. My parents looked genuinely confused, as if they were realizing they'd been manipulated along with me. Why would Tyler lie to us? My mother asked weakly. Because he needed your help to get a job he couldn't qualify for on his own. He used your concern for me to convince you to undermine my candidacy with my own boss. I pulled out my phone and showed them Tyler's LinkedIn profile, pointing out the employment gaps and timeline discrepancies I'd discovered. Tyler's been struggling professionally for years, but instead of telling you the truth, he's been taking credit for work he didn't do, and achievements that happened after he left his jobs. When he found out about the promotion opportunity at Morrison Associates, he saw a chance to solve his career problems by eliminating his competition. His competition? My father repeated. Me. His sister, who actually works at the company and has the qualifications he lacks. The weight of realization was settling over my parents' faces. But I wasn't finished. And the best part is that he convinced you to help him do it by making you believe you were protecting me from a mistake. My mother's voice was barely above a whisper. We thought we were helping both of you find better opportunities. You were helping Tyler steal my opportunity while destroying my professional reputation in the process. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. My parents sat stunned, apparently processing the possibility that their beloved son had orchestrated an elaborate deception that used their love for both children as a weapon against one of them. Finally, my father spoke. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, I replied honestly, but I'm going to make sure Tyler doesn't get away with this. As I drove back to Seattle, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in days. The betrayal was worse than I'd initially realized, but understanding the full scope of the manipulation also revealed opportunities for response that I hadn't previously considered. Tyler thought he'd successfully eliminated his competition and secured his future. Margaret thought she'd elegantly solved a personnel challenge while maintaining family harmony. My parents thought they'd protected me from a career mistake, but none of them knew what I was about to do next. Because if Tyler wanted to play games with my career, I was about to show him what happened when you underestimated a financial analyst who knew how to research, investigate, and build an airtight case. The real confrontation was just beginning. Wednesday morning, I walked into Morrison Associates with a plan that had kept me awake most of the night. I'd spent hours crafting an email that would change everything, but first, I needed to make one crucial phone call. At 9 a.m. sharp, I dialed the number for Morrison Associates board chairman, Robert Hendricks. I'd met him twice during company events and knew he valued direct communication and ethical business practices above all else. Mr. Hendricks? This is Jessica Chen from the marketing department. I need to speak with you about a personnel matter that involves potential misrepresentation of qualifications and conflicts of interest in the hiring process. His assistant scheduled an immediate meeting for 10:30 a.m. While I waited, I sent a carefully worded email to Tyler. I know what you did. We need to talk today before you make any final decisions about your future. Meet me at Cafe Vita on Pine Street at noon. Trust me, you'll want to hear what I have to say. At 10:30, I sat across from Robert Hendricks in the executive conference room, a folder of documentation spread between us. The silver-haired chairman listened intently as I presented my findings about Tyler's employment history, the fabricated nonprofit connection, and the coordinated effort to undermine my candidacy. Ms. Chen, he said when I finished, these are serious allegations. Do you have documentation to support your claims? I handed him printed copies of everything I'd gathered. Tyler's real employment timeline, testimonials from his former colleagues, evidence of his misrepresented achievements, and phone records showing the sequence of calls between my family and Margaret. Mr. Hendricks reviewed the materials methodically, his expression growing increasingly grave. After 20 minutes, he looked up. Ms. Chen, based on what you've presented here, it appears that Morrison Associates may have been the target of what amounts to employment fraud. If your brother misrepresented his qualifications and orchestrated family interference to secure a position, that's grounds for immediate termination of any job offer. There's something else, I added, pulling out my final piece of evidence. Tyler hasn't just been planning to join Morrison Associates. He's been actively recruiting other employees from his current company to potentially follow him here, promising them opportunities that don't exist, and positions he has no authority to offer. This information had come from Sarah, Tyler's girlfriend, during a follow-up call I'd made the previous evening. In his excitement about his new opportunity, Tyler had been making grand promises to former colleagues about bringing them into his new leadership role at Morrison Associates. Mr. Hendricks's face darkened. That could constitute industrial espionage or trade secret theft, depending on what information he's been sharing. I believe it constitutes a pattern of unethical behavior that Morrison Associates should be aware of before making any final hiring decisions. Mr. Hendricks closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. Ms. Chen, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. The board will need to review this information immediately. In the meantime, I'm suspending all discussions with your brother, pending a full investigation. What about the regional director position? What about it? Will the board reconsider internal candidates now that you know the external recruitment process was compromised? Mr. Hendricks studied me carefully. Ms. Chen, based on what I've seen of your work and your handling of this situation, I think the board needs to have a very different conversation about leadership potential within this company. By noon, I was sitting at Cafe Vita, watching Tyler approach through the window. He looked confident, even cocky, probably expecting me to concede defeat and accept whatever arrangement our parents had negotiated. Jess, he said, sliding into the seat across from me, I'm glad you called. I was hoping we could work this out like adults. Work what out exactly? The transition. I know this situation is awkward, but Margaret thinks there might be opportunities for us to collaborate once I'm established in my role. I smiled, pulling out my phone and placing it on the table between us. Tyler, before we discuss collaboration, I need to ask you something. When exactly did you first contact Margaret Morrison about opportunities at Morrison Associates? His confident expression faltered slightly. What do you mean? I mean, when did you first reach out to her about potentially working at my company? Was it after our conversation about the regional director position, or before? Jess, I think you're overcomplicating this. Margaret reached out to me after talking to Mom and Dad. That's interesting, because I spoke with the board chairman this morning, and we reviewed the timeline of communications. It turns out Margaret has records of an initial inquiry from you that predates any conversation with our parents by several weeks. Tyler's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm talking about you using my company holiday party to network with Margaret, then following up with emails about opportunities, then recruiting our parents to help undermine my candidacy when you realized you couldn't compete on qualifications alone. That's not what happened. Tyler, I know about your real employment history. I know about the projects you claimed credit for after you'd already left the companies. I know about the performance issues that led to your departure from Northwest Creative. I know you quit your current job last Friday, before our family meeting on Saturday. Each revelation hit him like a physical blow. His casual confidence crumbled, replaced by something that looked like panic. I also know, I continued, that you've been promising positions at Morrison Associates to people from your current company, positions that don't exist, and that you have no authority to offer. Tyler slumped in his chair. How did you find all this out? I'm a financial analyst, Tyler. Research and investigation are literally what I do for a living. Did you really think I wouldn't look into this once I realized something was wrong? What do you want? He asked quietly. I want you to understand what you've done. You didn't just steal an opportunity from me. You manipulated our parents into betraying their own daughter. You lied to my boss about your qualifications. You damaged my professional reputation based on fabricated concerns. And you did it all because you couldn't handle the fact that your little sister was more successful than you. Tyler's eyes filled with tears. I've been struggling, Jess. Everything's been falling apart for months. Sarah doesn't know how bad things have gotten. I maxed out my credit cards trying to keep up appearances. I was about to lose my apartment. So you decided to destroy my career to save yours? I thought maybe we could both win. You could take the senior account director position, I could handle the regional expansion, and everyone would be happy. Everyone except me, you mean? Tyler was quiet for a long moment. What happens now? Now you call Margaret Morrison and withdraw your application. You tell her that you misrepresented your qualifications, and that the family coordination was inappropriate. You take responsibility for what you've done. And if I don't? I picked up my phone and showed him the screen, which displayed Robert Hendricks's contact information. Then the board chairman continues his investigation into employment fraud and industrial espionage, and this becomes a legal matter instead of a family matter. Tyler stared at the phone, then at me. You'd really do that to your own brother? Tyler, you already did worse to your own sister. We sat in silence for several minutes while Tyler processed his options. Finally, he pulled out his own phone and dialed Margaret's number. Margaret? It's Tyler Chen. I need to speak with you about the marketing director position. Yes, I can come in this afternoon. There are some things I need to clarify about my background and qualifications. After ending the call, Tyler looked at me with something that might have been respect mixed with resentment. I hope you're happy. I'm not happy, Tyler. I'm disappointed. In you, in our parents, in the whole situation. But I'm also relieved that the truth is finally coming out. Tyler left the cafe without another word, and I sat alone for a while, processing what had just happened. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Jessica, can you come to my office at 3 p.m.? The board would like to speak with you. That afternoon, I found myself back in Margaret's office, but this time I wasn't alone. Robert Hendricks was there, along with 2 other board members I recognized from company events. Jessica, Margaret began, looking uncomfortable, I owe you an apology. The board has reviewed the situation, and it's clear that I allowed personal considerations to cloud my professional judgment. Robert Hendricks took over. Ms. Chen, after reviewing your work history, your qualifications, and your handling of this difficult situation, the board has unanimously decided to offer you the regional director position, the real one, based in Seattle, with the responsibilities we originally discussed. I felt a surge of vindication, but also exhaustion. What about the concerns about my leadership readiness? Based on how you handled this situation, another board member replied, we think those concerns were unfounded. The way you researched the facts, presented your case professionally, and confronted a difficult family situation shows exactly the kind of leadership qualities we need. Margaret leaned forward. Jessica, I want you to know that your brother came to see me this afternoon. He withdrew his application and acknowledged that he had misrepresented his qualifications. He also apologized for the family coordination and took full responsibility for the situation. What will happen to him? That's between Tyler and his current employer, Robert Hendricks replied. Our focus now is on moving forward with Morrison and Associates' leadership transition. 3 months later, I was settled into my new role as regional director, overseeing West Coast operations from my expanded office overlooking Elliott Bay. The transition had been smoother than expected, and the team had responded well to my leadership style once they saw that I valued collaboration alongside strategic thinking. My relationship with my family had required more time to repair. My parents had been genuinely shocked to learn about Tyler's manipulation and had spent weeks apologizing for their role in undermining me. Tyler himself had moved to Denver, finding a position with a smaller marketing firm where he could start over without the baggage of his fabricated achievements. During our last conversation before he left, Tyler had finally been honest about his struggles. I was jealous of your success, he admitted. Everything seemed to come so easily to you, while I was constantly fighting just to stay afloat. I convinced myself that you didn't need another achievement, that maybe this one could be mine instead. Success didn't come easily to me, Tyler, I'd replied. I worked for it. Every night, every weekend, every sacrifice I made was a choice to prioritize my career. You could have made different choices too. I know that now. I'm sorry, Jess. For all of it. The apology had helped, but trust would take longer to rebuild. As for Margaret, our working relationship had evolved into something more honest and productive than before. She'd learned to appreciate my direct communication style, and I'd learned to navigate the political complexities of executive leadership without compromising my core values. The most important lesson I'd learned was that merit alone isn't enough in the corporate world. You also need to protect your interests and verify information, even when it comes from people you trust. Family loyalty doesn't excuse dishonesty, and professional success requires both excellent work and strategic thinking about office dynamics. But perhaps most importantly, I'd learned that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. When people try to make decisions about your life without your input, even with good intentions, you have not just the right, but the responsibility to take control of your own narrative. Today, as I review strategic plans for our West Coast expansion, I sometimes think about how different things might have been if I'd simply accepted my family's version of events. Tyler would have gotten a job he wasn't qualified for, I would have been sidelined into a lesser role, and everyone would have continued believing that family manipulation was an acceptable way to solve career challenges. Instead, the truth came out. Qualified people ended up in appropriate positions, and I learned that sometimes the most important promotion you can give yourself is the courage to fight for what you've earned. The company they called definitely had different plans, but in the end, those plans aligned with merit, honesty, and the kind of leadership that organizations actually need to succeed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.